freshman year of university for my child development class, it was required to do volunteer work in order to receive credit. The professor gave us an entire class period to see presentations about the volunteer work around the area. Towards the end of the class, I had seen over 10 presentations. Then Paul went up and gave his presentation about 10 books at home. Now, by that time, I was already falling asleep because I was hearing the same repetitive presentation. You know, the usual. It was an after-school program, I helped the students complete their homework, etc., etc. However, when Paul presented, it was completely different. Besides the fact that he was all over the place and super energetic, like we all know he is, his presentation about 10 books at home was completely different and set apart from the rest. One reason was that it was in my community, which I had never heard of before. I mean, it's literally 3 blocks away from my house. Second, it was only one day for 1 hour a week. However, the main aspect that set it apart was that I went to the child's home, which is a lot more personal. And what also stood out to me the most was when Paul said that volunteers here weren't just tutors, they were role models. As Paul went up and had a couple minutes to give his presentation, he was talking about the great difference that it makes amongst the community. He stated how high schoolers in the East Palo Alto community, 70% of them end up dropping out by the age of 16 or 17. Then he explained how providing children with an early education program, where it starts at home, can make a huge impact on the children's lives. Now, after the presentation, I got really curious and interested on what this program is really about. So I went in for the interview, and after I got accepted, I went in for my training, which none of the other volunteer programs require to do so. But after the training, I realized that role modeling was a much more than I thought it would be. Throughout the training, I learned that I had to plan my lessons myself, make it fun, and more importantly, be learner-centric. And before going in, I had no idea what learner-centric meant, which now I know that it was more about my learner than it is about me, and not about anyone else. It's just about my learner. The lessons that I planned were for him to enjoy them, and also to learn from them. As I went in for my first lesson, I was probably more nervous than my learner was. As I show up, my learner was bawling his eyes out, crying hysterically. He kept repeating to his mom that he didn't want me there, that he didn't want a teacher to be there, that he doesn't want anything to do with me. At that very moment when I walked into that scene, I wanted to run out, leave, and I was thinking to myself, what have I gotten myself into? However, I knew that I had to get myself together, and I remembered what Paul had told me throughout the training. I was more than a teacher. I was a friend. So I pulled out all the 10 books that we got from the training, and I gave them all to him. And there was one particular book, and it had buttons that made noises, and it was Mickey Mouse. That is when he got curious and started pressing the buttons on the book. There was literally one hand wiping away the tears while the other hand was pressing the buttons. And we proceeded with the lesson. Then we both pulled through the lesson, and by the end, I was actually super happy and excited to go back. Now at the next lesson, my learner's mother was a bit more open with me, and she told me that she thought my learner had a speech delay, and that he had mental problems. However, I knew that he was smart, and I wanted to prove everyone wrong. I wanted to prove his mother wrong, his teacher wrong, and anyone that believed that my learner wasn't smart wrong. That is when I started to take the wrong approach. I wanted to teach him letters, numbers, and skills by a certain amount of time to prove everyone that he could do it, and that that he really is a smart child. That is where I started to become teacher-centric. But 10 Books at Home is about being learner-centric. I remember I would go to the role model meetups and I would just complain, complain, and complain. And around the 4th month of attending the role model meetups, Paul gave me a piece of advice. I think by that point, he was tired of hearing all my pessimistic views, and he told me, quote unquote, "Hey dude, instead of just focusing on the negative stuff and what he's doing wrong, why don't you just focus on what he's doing right?" Now that changed absolutely everything. It was this switch that went in my head. I thought to myself, oh my God, this is what 10 Books at Home is about. This is what specifically I learned throughout my training. Yet, I wasn't doing that. So then before, when I was being teacher-centric, I would only take him one activity and really focus on that one activity throughout the entire lesson. And if he didn't want to participate, I would tell him that he needs to do it. We would sometimes sit there for a couple minutes until he would give in and participate. However, when I became learner-centric, I now take several activities, and he chooses whichever one he wants to do. Since I started being learner-centric, now my learner can not only spell his first name, but his last name. He can write, count, and say the numbers up to 40. And with me, he is no longer shy. He even takes initiative and tells me what he wants to do. Since my learner is so shy, at first he wouldn't say a word to me. Slowly but surely he progressed. First he spoke to me through his mom, then he started talking in just yeses and nos. After like 7 months, he started talking to me directly in short phrases. Now, a year and a half later, he talks so much and too fast sometimes, even to the point where I can't understand him. He'll even start yelling of excitement and I have to tell him, "All right, Gonzalo, that's great, but can you slow it down a bit for me so I can keep up?" Since being learner-centric, it has even come to the point that we have such a strong relationship now that he waits for me outside in front of his gate, and he comes to me without me having to ask him, and he helps me carry the activity boxes or carry my bag out of my car. He then right away gives me his homework, and it's even come to the point where sometimes I'll see him on top of his father's truck, and he'll be on top of it looking because he knows around what time I show up. And the moment he sees me, he jumps down, gets off the truck, and runs to his mom to let her know that I'm there. He even made me a very cute surprise birthday card. And let me remind you that this is the exact same kid that I started to believe that had a speech delay and a mental illness just because he wouldn't even speak to me. Now, growing up in this education system where it's just testing having to prove ourselves that we know this much by a certain amount of time, I know that many of us do feel that we have to keep proving the education system that we are smart enough, especially Hispanics. I myself am Hispanic. I know the pressures that come along with having to prove myself, especially in wanting to get a higher education. I have to fight the education system. I have to prove myself. I had to prove myself all throughout elementary, middle, high, and even high school and even college. That although I'm considered a minority, I know this amount of stuff. And many of our learners are Hispanic or considered a minority. And the reason why I wanted to prove everyone wrong with Gonzalo was because he reminded me of myself a lot. We are both young, Hispanic, that live in the same community. And he even has to prove himself every single day at school. Now, I kept thinking he needed to change to prove the tests, report cards, and teachers that he is smart enough. But then I realized that it's not him who needed the change. It was me who needed the change. I was so caught up in trying to make my learners smart or equally qualified to pass on to the next level that I actually neglected him. I wasn't seeing his true potential. And I'm glad that Paul told me that advice. I am glad that I was brought back to what 10 Books a Home is about. And because of that, my learner Gonzalo is now willing to open up to me and show me his true potential.